Over the last 2 decades, Cartier has been part of the vanguard of high-end watches, having developed quite a wide range of some fine men's lines, including the Collection Privée Cartier Paris (CPCP), followed by the Fine Watchmaking Collection (FWM). However, sadly, both of these magnificent watch series came to a creeping end, leaving many collectors and the watch world alike with one chill tingle down the spine and the ever-burning question, why? To put it simply, a lot of things happened down the line in the brand, and today we'll be discussing the rather unfortunate events that plagued the majestic Cartier, and, to many, sent it tumbling down. Without further ado, let's dive right into it. Launched at the SIHH in 1998, the Collection Privée Cartier Paris (CPCP) was primarily said to have a target audience of men who were decidedly more aware and demanding of watches with the widely exceptional mechanical caliber in all ramifications. To answer that, the Cartier brand made a special series under which most of its greatest designs were found, like the Tortue, the Cloche, and the Pasha, and many more. Cartier also worked with exceptional makers like Piaget, Frédéric Piguet, and even Jaeger-LeCoultre to make the best possible movements that were then possible for the watches in the collection. However, most of the watches in the CPCP were released in slightly bigger cases than Cartier was renowned for, giving it a more masculine look. From the late 1920s, aesthetically pleasing details were added to further highlight the collection, like the Paris engraving underneath the brand name and the rosette at the very middle of the dial, which was generally immensely loved by a lot of collectors and enthusiasts. Interestingly, quite a large amount of the models were released in very limited editions, and sometimes just around 100 pieces, and even the ones that weren't limited were only made in 250 pieces at most, which is probably one of the reasons why so many CPCP models can't be readily seen at so many auctions. Despite the adoration that Cartier was receiving, it had some potential obstacles, and to counter them, Cartier had to change its vision and plan for the series. What were the problems? First of all, the demand for in-house calibers became generally quite rampant. The interest in it picked up pace, and Cartier had some difficulties in delivering their watches. They just couldn't be delivered on time for one reason or another. On the movement side of things, it came from multiple third-party suppliers, and as for the cases, it was also produced by different case makers. Other fragments of their watches, like the hands and even the fancy crystals, were all delivered by different third-party suppliers. With all this into consideration, it's easy to see why their watches just couldn't be delivered on time, as sometimes they would be handicapped to move at the speed of their varying suppliers. Furthermore, because nearly all of the suppliers who were generally involved in the production of the Collection Privée Cartier Paris models were different, the assembling was also carried out in workshops at various locations, and the entire process of simply making a timepiece was simply far from easy. Far from it. For Cartier to gain a monopoly, or a much more sturdy control over the production process, there was basically only one solution that they could think about: the production of everything under one roof. During the reign of the CPCP, they painstakingly worked so hard to make their very own 30,000 square meter manufacturing plant in Le Chaux-de-Fonds, and also in Geneva, a competent workshop. The workshop would have been much smaller, of course, but definitely would be just as important, allowing Cartier to create their own movements according to the Seal of Geneva. However, everything abruptly halted for the Collection Privée Cartier Paris when the first pieces of the fine watchmaking collection were presented with quite a warm welcome at the SIHH in 2018, sliding it quite discreetly into extinction. For the passionate fans of the Cartier brand, when the fine watchmaking collection first landed on the scenes, it most certainly didn't go unnoticed. The first ever watch that erupted from this new collection and was shown to the media and press was none other than the Blue Flying Tourbillon, which of course came with the brand new in-house movement, the 9452 MC hand-wound movement, proudly with the Seal of Geneva. After that, a series of some bold masculine tourbillon watches came to fruition. All of the watches from this particular collection featured the exact same movements, the 9452 MC Flying Tourbillon caliber built in Cartier's new Geneva workshop. Alas, there was one huge problem here. The 9452 MC caliber had a rather petite diameter around it, comfortably and effortlessly fitting a more classic and petite watch with a 38mm case build. On the other hand, Cartier preferred the large watch trend, and basically speaking, all of the watches they had produced prior pointed exactly in that direction. They can hardly be blamed though. At the same time, specifically in 2008, the trend for larger watches, especially for men, was quite hyper and, dare we say, at its utmost peak. However, Cartier may have taken the trend just a bit too strong, as it came in such a large case, specifically for the Cartier brand, the largest they had ever made. Let's look at some examples, shall we? The Calibre de Cartier Tourbillon came in a round but bulky 45mm case. The Ballon Bleu Flying Tourbillon also had a larger case of 47mm, and that's not even close to being the largest. The Tank American, quite the literal tank, came in an even larger and more bulky case of 52mm. To add fuel to the already raging inferno, the back of each of those timepieces comprised of a circular window to view the pretty but shockingly little caliber in comparison that was just basically surrounded by nothing but a lot of empty, wasteful, and bland-looking void, much to the displeasure of a number of collectors. With some of the blunders and probably miscalculations on Cartier's part here and there, the release was hardly taken seriously. Coupled with the price tag of $95,000, not a lot of users were given reasons to even have a serious look into the series to see if it was truly worth the gamble. However, the finishing was pretty remarkable, and there were hardly any disputed subjects about it, despite the fact that there was little sign of the gorgeous, delicate elements that made the Collection Privée Cartier Paris before it so well known in the first place. In place of the small engravings at the very back of the watch that were usually the brand name and, of course, the number of the piece itself and the series in the CPCP collection had, it was replaced with just large Cartier engravings on the back, and coupled with that, the quite large case and a number of the movements on the fine watchmaking collection models. Another issue that plagued the Cartier brands was that they numbered their movements and cases separately, which made no sense to a lot of interested collectors, given the movement number was for internal purposes and should have only been in small and probably just in a sort of a blind spot where it can't readily be seen. It felt like it had a lack of identity, as the keen eye for intricate details seemed to have been lost, and the brand was concentrating solely on the latest hyped-up trends generating the most traction, and not the rich history that was behind the brand in the first place that made it seem just so desirable in the past. Yes, some watches need to be bulky because of the watch's movement. If it is complicated and needs room on the dial, it's fully understandable. But was that the case with the first tourbillon models? However, in 2014, Cartier proved it could correct the problem when it released a 39mm Ballon Bleu Flying Tourbillon, although it was powered by the same caliber as its 47mm sibling. In the decade reign of the FMW collection, the Cartier released the Rotund line. Although it also had a huge drawback, it was just too frequent. Year in, year out, there was a constant release of the Rotund watches, which, to be fair, was high-end, but regardless of that, it failed to get the warranted traction it should have gotten. The overwhelming wave of available complications had an unsavory feeling to the tongue, and the sales were just underwhelming too. Let's be more practical. Say you're a watch collector and you have about 30 different complicated Rotund models to pick from the same brand. How many would you actually get? By that simple logic, a lot was left untouched collectively. One of the watches that suffered the most was the 47mm Ballon Bleu, which was available for a fraction of its original retail price. Sometimes it was even a third of that. Cartier then decided to buy back the watches that were difficult to be sold to users in order to reduce the number of watches that were available on the gray market. As of now, the CPCP and the FMW lines have been discontinued, especially the former, but perhaps it may not be dark and gloomy for Cartier, given they have already presented their new era. With the three impressive Tank Centre models, maybe in the future, some of the famously complicated calibers over the last decade would be introduced into some classic models like the Pasha, which Cartier is already widely known for. The new CEO, Cyril Vigneron, seems to largely know the inner workings of the Cartier and how the brand should be run, perhaps combining the vast experiences of the staff over the last decade. There may just be a light at the end of the tunnel, and who knows, they may even be making a planned framework for an impressive comeback at this very moment, or hopefully in the forthcoming years.